Hello, welcome to SpitFireMods. Today we're going to be showing the install of a 20 mode chip. It's our default 20 mode available on eBay. We're currently releasing almost 100 different variations of this chip. This is considered our Type B chip. Type B means it's the new chip. It's the new 12F683. It has a different schematic than our past chips. So our past chips are built for fastest rapid fire, fastest dual trigger rapid fire, and they have some chips with burst in them. Those chips are guaranteed to be the fastest for every game, meaning there is no chip available anywhere in the world that can shoot faster in any game than our rapid fire Type A chip. But the problem is that chip, that's all it had space for. Due to the design of the chip, there was no programming space to allow for additional modes or a whole new chipset. So what we did is we redrafted the entire thing, and along with some assistance from other programmers, we have developed a new chip. It's a Type B. So our fast one is Type A, and then the new schematic is for Type B. This is the schematic that you see here, and what this is there's 3 different variations. You can wire it to the Tactile button that you would install. You can also wire it to the sync button. Let's grab a Tactile while we're at it. It can be wired to a Tactile, it can be wired to the sync button on the controller, and it can also be put in a socket. So this is the chip here. What we're going to do is just get started here. We got our heat gun ready to go. Let's turn on our iron. So we're going to glue the chip into place. The chip always gets butted up against this little white peg and touching the one of the trigger studs with the notch at the bottom. So your notch would be down here. Notch is towards the board underneath the chip there. The notch would be there, and then so pin 1's here, pin 1 through 4, and then 5 through 8 coming down the other side. Alright, so once the chip's in place, we're going to go ahead and pre-tin our legs. The easiest way to solder is always to have solder on both sides of your connection. Don't worry about soldering your wire so much, because if you have fresh solder on both connections and you got good copper wire, you really don't even need to tin your wire. We may tin our wire because that's just something I'm used to, but you may not have to. So a little bit of solder on all the connections, and then using our schematic. One thing I like to get out of the way is get this button soldered in. So what we're going to do is trim the legs. On the back of your Tactile, you're going to see 2 bars. You're going to have a line going this way and a line going this way. Basically, the line is the bus. So if your line goes across the right and left sides, from right to left would be your trigger. So your line, if a line's going down the right side, a line's going down the left side, then across the lines is your open connection, and when you push it, that's what joins it. So you're going to be putting a wire on both sides. So the line is one connection, and then the line on the other side is the other connection. A little confusing, but that's how it goes. We're going to drill, using a 9/64 inch drill bit, we're going to drill a hole in our controller down where our trigger finger would be. Alright, once we get the hole in there, we're going to kind of make sure we hone it out. We want to make sure it's plenty big. We don't want any binding on our trigger. So, make sure there's no ridges on there. You can take the button, put it into place, and make sure you got good clickability there. So now we're going to take our button. I've trimmed off the legs on the one side and then trimmed the other ones a little short so that they're not real long. And now the part is gluing it into place. Holding this button while you're gluing always seems to be a challenge, and holding it with your finger ends up getting your finger burnt. So what I like to do is make sure I have it in place, and then basically just tack it into place with glue using my finger so I get not too heavy duty burns when I do it. I'm out of air here, and if I run it you won't be able to hear me, so we will just let that cool down, and then it always seems to stay too wet too long, so and then that's what makes your button bind. So you got to hold that in place until it's actually cool. So patience when putting this trigger on is the main thing. It's actually still moving around. So if you can get it to sit still without movement and staying tight down, then you can set it aside and let that start cooling. So we'll get back to our thing here. Now on the schematic, what you'll notice is with your chip face down, notch at the bottom of the board, you're going to have pin 1 through 4 gets the resistor. So we're going to grab one of the resistors. The gold one should be a 10K, I believe. So we're going to take this resistor and bend the legs to make it into a little bit of a U. And then I always pre-solder all the connections here. And then we're going to solder this into place. This basically goes from pin 1 to 4. So we're going to do the one pin and then push the leg looped into the other one and then flow that across. So the resistor is on there. Each leg's held on so it'll stay in place, so as we wire the rest of it, as long as we don't liquefy both sides, it won't matter. The other resistor is a 1K that we're not going to need right now, so I'm going to put that aside. So one resistor is all that we need. Now we're going to pull out our wire here. I like to make it nice and stretched out so it isn't catching on me. So what I like to do is run all my wires from the target back to the target back to the chip, and then tack them as I go with hot glue. So I basically drop a bunch of wires and cut them to length. So we're going to start from this side. We're going to do the blue wire, which is the trigger for the left-hand trigger. We're going to tack that in place, and then we're going to trim it long enough so we can run it. Then we're going to go to the next wire. This way I can run all my wires and then glue them all at once in one step. Save time. Alright, so now we're going to do the LED a while. Basically I pre-tin my wire. There's barely any solder on it. The key to soldering when working on a controller is enough solder that you can't even see it. Like, you can barely even see there's solder on that wire. And the reason being is these connections are tiny. They're almost unbelievably tiny. So when you touch the wire to that solder and you hold your solder gun on there, let it liquefy, it's going to harden right up. So there's no reason to have a big ball of solder, and a big ball of solder in a controller is only going to short out on something beside it. Alright, so now we're looking to do the power connections. There's the negative connection, which is over here on the left when you're looking at the controller. Up and down, like from this position, it's on the left. So that's our negative. Our positive is there's two little pins on the right hand side when you're looking at it, up and down with the bottom towards you. So that would be the furthest to the right normally. Right now it's to the left because I have it upside down. I kind of wire mine upside down, I'm not sure why. But because there's not really wires going here, so I kind of work in the open area. That way I have the open area in front of me. I'm not trying to climb over all the other wires. Alright, so we got a few of our wires on. We're looking for our other trigger. The tactile button will be last. So we'll get our right trigger. So when you're soldering, again, a bead of solder on your wire, and all you got to do is touch it to the connection and liquefy it, and you're done. Alright, so now all our wires are on there except for our D-pad, which I'm going to kind of keep that aside because that's a little bit more complicated. But all our basic wires are on there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to route them. So we're going to take this wire, we're going to kind of route it around this thing. I like to stay clear of the D-pad areas where the pads hit the buttons. So I loop it a little bit, and then I take my glue gun and I tack it. I always like to tack the end, so right where it hits the trigger, we're going to tack it. This is where the plastic smudger comes in. Very important tool. Or an X-Acto knife can be used just as well. We stock all the tools you see us use, we stock. So if you ever need a tool, or you can't find it at your local hardware store, we have everything here in quantity. And we usually have it listed on our site, but a lot of times we never get to actually list everything. So we sit on inventory for no benefit at all. But we have the inventory, so those guys who call us, we can set you up with everything you need. So basically, a little smudge of hot glue. You gotta let the hot glue dry before you move the wires, otherwise they'll just come right off. But tacking everything down is probably the most important thing, because these controllers, when all these wires are tacked down, these controllers will basically last for the life of the controller, because your wiring is basically a part of the controller once you're done. Now this is assuming my wiring job is good and I'm not going to have any problems. If you're first starting out, you might want to actually test your controller before you glue everything in place. The glue comes off easily though. When the glue's hard, it peels right off. So it's not a big thing, but some people it's good to, if you're just starting out, it's good to not finish it. And I know if this was the first one I was doing, I would probably not want to glue it in place until I knew for a fact that it was going to work. Alright, so I'm keeping my wires straight and orderly here so that I can actually track where they go without them looping around each other and me getting lost. So alright, so our wires are now packed down nice and tight. Alright, so now we can actually finish up our wiring. So what we're going to want to do is route our wires. The best way is to use two small tools, one to route it and the other one to kind of hold it in place. So our right trigger is going to go to pin 5, so we're going to hook that guy up because he's at the top. And that's what happens when you don't hold it tight enough, but with this fine wire it's always hard enough to know how tight to squeeze it without damaging it. But once we get that done, this gets wired to pin 5. Alright, and then pack it down in place. Good. That wire wasn't quite glued yet, so we're going to glue it into place. Alright, now we're ready for some of our other wires. From 1 going up, we're going to have our hot leg is 1, which is joined to 4, which also throws our tactile, and then our LED is 2, and then our left trigger is 3. So our power line would be right here. So we're going to start with the power line. So the benefit to leaving your wires a little long is to actually, and that was the benefit to gluing your wires. You can yank the heck out of them and it doesn't bother anything. If these wires can put it with my install, then they're not going anywhere. So So that's our hot wire. Next would be our LED, pin 2. This is new pliers here for me, and it's certainly not a it's not ideal, but it has this is why I leave my wires on. I just nibble off these wires. Very small wires, perfect for installing in a controller, but almost too small sometimes. Alright, so I'm having trouble getting enough solder on that connection, so we're going to solder up our iron, which should give us a good connection. Alright, so routing the wires is always good because having the wires not hit anything is where you want it when you're done. If you get any hot glue on anything, don't try to take it off, just leave it there because it'll come off real easy once it's hard. Alright, so now we have our left trigger. Alright, then we had our ground sticking over there, which is pin 8, so we're going to wire up our ground a while. You always want to be careful with your grounds and your hots, because they're the ones that are they're the ones that are going to cause problems if you screw them up. So I usually make sure I glue them up and get them coated up in some glue so that they're not going to touch anything ever. So once your wires are somewhat in place here, you can glue up the ball of wire. Alright, so we're still going to need to get to pin 4, so we're going to glue up 1 through 3. And leave that there for now. Alright. So now we're going to need a wire for our tactile. So what we're going to do is we're going to string our wires off now. So we need a wire going from pin 8 to pin 4. Actually, not from pin 8 to pin 4, but to pin 8 and to pin 4. The one thing about the tactile is there's no polarity. A lot of times you have questions, does a tactile have polarity? A tactile has no polarity. When wiring to the sync button is the path to ground, so you're running the hot to sync button. And when you're doing your tactile, you're running a hot and a negative. I'm pulling the feed to ground, so there's no polarity usually involved, because you're basically just shorting out hot to ground. So we can twist our wire, make ourselves a nice little single strand so it's easier to manage when we're putting this shell together. Alright, so what we have so far is our left trigger going to pin 3. We have our hot right here. We have our hot wire going to pin 2, or pin 1, and then we have our LED going to pin 2. We have our 4 for our tactile, we have an 8 to the tactile. So what we're missing yet is 7 and 6. 6 goes to LJ on the back, 7 goes to the D-pad. So now we're going to run our 7 and 6, and then that actually is the end of our wire. So let's get let's flip the board over and run LJ now. LJ is basically to the solder connection underneath the controller. And this one has a really weird looking solder ball there. I'm not sure what the big giant solder ball is, other than just a very messy solder job. So TP16, I believe, is what it's labeled. I'm just going to double check that quick. Yeah. Alright, this schematic is actually not drawn quite right. The LJ is actually up there. That's a new sheet we just made. I'm going to have them fix that. So this schematic is wrong. It's actually the next solder point up. I thought that looked a little strange. So something to note, the connection, it's right here. So what you're looking at is this pin right here. In the schematic it was stopped here, but that was just a typo or a misdraw. So it's actually this connection right here, which is the LJ. It's usually 1, 2, 3 down is how I remember it, and that's why that schematic was looking way off. So so if you happen to get your hands on a bad schematic, now you know. I think only 1 or 2 of those are around, so we should be good, since that was just done last night. So we're going to tack this one into place, like our other wires, and then we're going to cut it to fit. This actually gets routed all the way across, so I'm going to run it on the underside, across the bottom here, right through the battery area, which is an easy place to wire, right across the bottom of that base. Routing wires can be a problem sometimes. If you route them and something hits them, it creates a lot of trouble getting the controller back together. So you want to make sure, if you're not sure how you should route it, always hold your controller board to the shell and actually get a look in there and see where the paths are and where they aren't. See how there's some plastic here? These will actually push down on the wire and can actually cause problems with this fine wire, because that's wire wrap wire, so it has a very thin casing. It could be punched down onto a connection and make a connection. So that's our LJ, so we're going to wire that up, and that goes to pin 6. You can take the rumble motors off if they bother you. I just leave them on because I'm hoping I'm not going to be in this shell for very long. Alright, so now we just have the D-pad to do. So everything's pretty well in place. nicely tacked. The good thing with the spudge stick is when there's a little glue on there, it sticks to any of the little strands. One little strand across your D-pad and your button won't work. So one little strand of that glue, just a little hair, you can barely even see it. If it lays across your pad landing, the puck won't hit and you won't get a connection. Alright, so now we want to get on our D-pad. So the upper half of the D-pad of the button is where we go. Now if you just scratch with an X-Acto knife on the very edge of the circle, you're going to see copper. If you have a good rosin-based solder, you can clean your tip, solder, get a little solder on there, and then put a little solder on the board. Now the trick here is to make sure you have plenty of heat on your solder iron, because a cold solder iron will have trouble doing this, but if you actually get contact with your button and rub it on that connection, you'll actually end up tinning the connection, which is what you want to do. So you might have to actually set your iron on there and put some solder on it at the same time. So that should be slightly tinned, and then once we get our wire stripped and tinned, we should be good. So tin the tip of your wire, and then bend it so that the very metal part is the lowest part, and then set the metal part on the D-pad where you shaved some of that off. And then once it sticks, you should be good. So that's actually on there, tinned and soldered on, and there's very no hump on there at all. So, and then we want to make sure we route it out of the circle. So we're going to pull it out the side of the circle and then route it down the edge. And then once you're clear of the pad area, you're free to muck that up with some glue. You want to watch these circles here because they have little studs that go through there. So get that glued down. Once that's glued down, you can trim it, and then we're good to wire. So now we can route that wire up to pin 7. Depending on the quality of your solder, it'll tell you how much you gotta pre-tin everything, but if you tin everything, you can't go wrong. Both sides. So, alright, so everything's in there. Push your wires in tight. Everything's wired up, so now we can finish the gluing. Just shoot a load of glue in there, maybe tack down your wire on both ends. Even this wire. Or your button can be all tied in, so now our entire thing is one solid glued block. So everything is on there. That area is where nothing hits in your controller. These things on the bottom won't matter, but on the top they would. So you want to clean the top. Again, sweep your top before you put your controller back together. Alright, and you can get some of these hairs out just so they don't fall on the top if you want. Now we're going to throw a couple new sticks on this one because this is a used customer controller and it looked like garbage, so we're going to put on some new black sticks on a white controller because I think the black looks a lot better on white than that gray does. So, a couple new sticks. We didn't finish our tactile button, so we're going to go ahead and finish our tactile button. it's always a good idea if you have any dirty triggers to clean them up now. The best thing for cleaning controllers are these Lysol wipes. Some controllers are filthy, and then if you got a really dirty one, these here actually have a scrubbing pattern on them. And the scrubbing pattern is good for the really mucked up controllers, but if you soak this, the little LT spot where it has that, catches all the dirt, if you soak that up a little bit and then come back to it later after we're done putting together, we should be all set. I blew the controller out earlier, but it's always good to blow some air across it when you're done. Alright, so our Tactile's half tacked on there. It probably won't come loose that easily now, so we can shoot a line of glue across each side. Getting glue underneath the bottom is kind of the process of just throwing a large ball in there. Now that I just glued that up, it's going to be very soft again, so it's a good idea to let that cool down. Alright, ours is held pretty well. We can hold it in place and try it out. Alright, it's not binding, so that's a good sign. So we're going to go ahead and start reassembling. So first thing you do is throw your top side on, and it goes on like that. Keep your wires for your Tactile free. Put your sticks through the holes, and then make sure your sync button is clicking, otherwise you're gonna have no sync button when you're done. This controller was relatively dirty. Alright, so our wire is coming right out this pocket right here for our Tactile. So we got our wire coming out for our top shell, so it's easy to put on. So we're going to lay it like this once it's assembled, and then we're going to have our shell here. So now we can cut and wire our shell on. This is always where you end up with a little too much wire, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to pre-tin these so it goes on real easy. Now again, either wire to the Tactile, it's not going to make a difference. No. You know what I did? I didn't pre-tin my switch. I usually do that earlier. Now the buttons should go on nice and easy. My shell keeps walking on me. Alright, so check to make sure they're both on there good. Now one thing I do is take my wires straight to the left and tack them down in two little spots. That way if one peels loose, I still have the other. So the last spot of hot glue, we're waiting on that, and then we should be all done. And we'll see how it works. I got a little stuff on my rumble motor here, some glue. Pull that off. Alright, so we should be good now. Make sure our board's down tight, our sync button's still functional. Now we have a little bit of extra wire right there, so we're just going to put that out of our way and close this up. And everything closed up good. Put a couple screws in that and try it out. Our new 20 mode. You get a good tactile. Last a long time. Sticks are good. Buttons are all making full contact. So I'll throw a battery in that. Hard to tell without it being synced to a thing. Now this, if it's a 20 mode, it should have a calibration. So when you first pop your battery in, you're holding the tactile, and then you fire it up with the tactile on, and then when you let go of the tactile, it should blink to confirm. Now that's a calibration. You don't want to be squeezing your triggers when you calibrate it. Yeah, so now we're actually now we're good. So you have to calibrate the chipsets. Most of ours are shipped with calibration. What that allows is for hair trigger. So when you calibrate it, you want your triggers fully extended, and what that means is it's sensing the actual variable voltage in the resistors on the triggers, and then it defines that as binary 1 or 0, 1 being, you know, the trigger pulled. So as soon as you pull the trigger, the mod kit's going to actually rapid fire, versus pulling the trigger and having the controller fire. So if the controller fires, that's a bad thing, because the controller will fire and then your mod chip will fire too, and that's what causes stutter. A lot of controllers don't have that feature, so they will stutter. You'll pull the trigger and it'll go spit, spit, it'll shoot, fire a couple times, and then all of a sudden it will pause, and then it will rapid fire, and the stutter will make you miss your target sometimes, and that kind of defeats the purpose. These are the rags that are good for cleaning these. These things are just filthy, so to clean out these things, you got to soak them, leave them soak a little bit, and then you come back. These we already soaked, so you scrub it now, and it should clean up. It's never good to have a dirty controller, but whenever we get a customer's controller, it's always dirty. So cleaning up your controllers, some of that dirt actually gets down in the sticks and causes problems, so it's always good to wipe down your controllers, keep those triggers clean, because they're very sensitive. It's not just an on-off button, it's actually a variable. Alright, so we're all polished up, good to go. As you can see, mode 1, mode 2, mode 3, squeeze the left trigger, mode 2, mode 1, mode 0. So controller works, tactile works, everything's good. Take our battery out and put the rest of the screws in, and we're good to go. So that's our schematic, or our bad schematic. Fix our LJ. So if you got a schematic going to this pin, you want to extend it to that pin. But we'll update those today. They were just done last night, so we'll have to update those and get those off out of our box there for kits. But that's your the new kit. So we're working through the bugs and the install along with everybody else. But other than that, it's pretty much a basic install like our Type A kit is. Other than the pin configuration is different, and we usually use a tactile as default. The tactile seems to work good with this type controller. And that's it. Thanks for watching, and then we'll be putting some other videos up on this specific controller, how to socket it, and also how to wire it into the sync button. Have a good night.